They ambushed my brothers in the dead of night. Bullets tore through flesh and bone. The Clantons and McLowrys thought the law would shield them from retribution. They were wrong. Dead wrong. I was born Wyatt Berry Stapp Earp on March 13th, 1848 in Monmouth, Illinois. My father, Nicholas, was a man who valued two things above all else: law and family. He instilled those same values in me and my brothers. We were raised to believe that civilization could only function when good men stood against chaos. I spent my early years drifting through the untamed territories of the American frontier. I drove wagons, I hunted buffalo, I wore a badge in Wichita and Dodge City. I learned what kind of men populated these lawless lands. Some were honest folk looking to build a life. Others were vultures, waiting to feed on weakness. I became skilled at telling the difference between the two. In 1879, I arrived in Tombstone, Arizona with my brothers Virgil and Morgan, and our wives. The silver boom had transformed this dusty corner of the territory into a place of opportunity. The streets buzzed with prospectors, miners, merchants, and all manner of fortune seekers. Money flowed like water through the saloons and gambling houses. Where money flowed, men with predatory instincts followed. Virgil was appointed city marshal and later deputy U.S. marshal. Morgan and I served as his deputies. We were determined to bring order to Tombstone. The decent citizens welcomed our presence. The criminal element did not. John Behan was the Cochise County Sheriff, a man with a weak spine and flexible morals. He cultivated friendships with the outlaws who operated in the county. The cowboys, they called themselves. They wore red sashes around their waists and lived by stealing cattle from across the Mexican border. They rustled, they robbed, they killed when it suited them. And Sheriff Behan looked the other way as long as his pockets stayed lined. You see, Clanton family was at the center of this outlaw band. Old Man Clanton, along with his sons Ike, Finn, and Billy. The McLowrys, Tom and Frank, were their closest associates. They operated from ranches outside town. They came to Tombstone to sell their stolen cattle and indulge in whiskey and women. I had a different vision for Arizona, a place where honest men could prosper without looking over their shoulders, where women and children could walk the streets without fear, where the law meant something. The cowboys represented everything that stood in the way of that vision. My brothers and I lived in a modest house on Fremont Street with our wives. Virgil was the oldest, a steady, reliable man who took his duties seriously. Morgan was the youngest, good-natured and loyal to a fault. We shared the same blood, the same sense of purpose, the same enemies. I had other allies. Doc Holliday was foremost among them. A dentist turned gambler, a southern gentleman dying slowly from consumption. He drank too much, and his temper was quick as lightning, but his friendship was unwavering. When trouble came, Doc was the man you wanted beside you. Tensions built slowly in Tombstone during 1880 and 81. The stage was robbed repeatedly. Virgil suspected the cowboys were responsible. When he investigated several murders, tied to these robberies, he received threats. The battle lines were being drawn. One night at the Oriental Saloon, I overheard Ike Clanton boasting about how they would run the Earps out of Tombstone or put them in the ground. He went silent when he noticed me watching, but his eyes held a promise of violence to come. My brothers and I discussed leaving Tombstone, starting fresh somewhere else, but we had invested in mining claims, built reputations, formed friendships. This was our home now, and we were not men who ran from threats. I told my wife Mattie that trouble was brewing. She suggested we leave before it found us. I explained that some conflicts cannot be avoided, only faced. She did not understand then. She would later. The conflicts with the cowboys grew more frequent as 1881 progressed. In March of that year, a stagecoach was robbed outside of Tombstone. The driver and a passenger were murdered, their bodies left to bake in the desert sun. When Virgil led a posse to investigate, we found evidence linking the crime to members of the Clanton gang. but witnesses suddenly developed poor memories when questioned. Sheriff Bean showed more interest in undermining our investigation than finding the killers. During this time, I made an arrangement with Ike Clanton. I offered him the reward money if he would help me capture 3 men suspected in the stage robbery. He agreed initially, then backed out when he realized it would mean betraying his friends. After that, he grew increasingly hostile, spreading rumors that I had threatened his life. The summer brought no relief from the tensions. In July, the cowboys ambushed a group of Mexican smugglers and stole their silver. When we investigated, Ike Clanton warned us to back away. He said some matters were best left alone. His tone made it clear that the warning carried a threat. On the night of October 25, 1881, Ike Clanton came to town drinking heavily. He moved from saloon to saloon, making loud threats against the Earps and Doc Holliday, saying he would kill us on sight the next time he saw us. The whole town could hear his ranting. The next morning, I found Ike stumbling down the street, still drunk, still armed despite the town ordinance forbidding weapons. I approached him from behind, grabbed his pistol, and struck him with my own weapon. I marched him to court, where he was fined for carrying weapons in town. His humiliation only fed his rage. That same morning, Tom McLowry rode into town. When Virgil encountered him carrying a rifle, he repeated my earlier actions, disarming and striking McLowry for violating the weapons ordinance. The cowboys were deliberately testing our resolve to enforce the law. By early afternoon on October 26th, word reached us that Ike and Billy Clanton, along with Tom and Frank McLowry, had gathered at the OK Corral. All were armed with pistols and rifles in direct violation of town ordinance. Virgil, as city marshal, decided we needed to disarm them. Doc Holliday joined Virgil Morgan and myself as we walked down Fremont Street toward the corral. Sheriff Bean intercepted us. He claimed he had already disarmed the men, that the situation was under control. We soon discovered this was a lie. When we entered the narrow lot near the corral, the cowboys stood waiting, hands hovering near their weapons, fury in their eyes. Virgil called out for them to throw up their hands. Instead, Billy Clanton and Frank McLowry reached for their pistols. The next 30 seconds changed everything. Gunfire erupted in the small space, the air filled with smoke and the thunder of revolvers. When it ended, Billy Clanton and both McLowry brothers lay dead or dying. Ike Clanton had fled. Morgan was shot through the shoulder. Doc was grazed. Virgil had been hit in the leg. We had acted as lawmen enforcing a legal ordinance. Yet within hours, Sheriff Bean had sworn out warrants for our arrests on charges of murder. The surviving cowboys portrayed themselves as innocent victims. The town divided into those who supported law and those who supported the cowboys. Judge Wells Spicer conducted a month-long hearing to determine if we should stand trial for murder. On November 29th, Spicer ruled that we had acted within our authority, that no crime had been committed. The cowboys were enraged by this decision. They swore revenge. These were not idle threats. On the night of December 28, 1881, Virgil was walking home from the Oriental Saloon. Multiple shotguns fired from the darkness. The blasts shattered his left arm and riddled his back with buckshot. He survived, but would never use that arm again. Witnesses identified Ike Clanton and others as the ambushers, yet Sheriff Bean made no arrests, claimed there was insufficient evidence. Our family closed ranks. We moved to a single defensible home, posted guards day and night. Morgan and I escorted Virgil to the train when he left for California to recover. The cowboys celebrated. They boasted in the saloons that one Earp was crippled. The others would soon be dead. On the evening of March 18, 1880, Morgan and I were playing billiards at Campbell and Hatch's saloon. Morgan took his shot, turned to me with a smile. Then the windows behind him exploded inward. 2 bullets struck my brother in the back. He fell into my arms, his blood soaking. My clothes. His eyes fixed on mine as the life drained from them. My brother died while I held him. The killers melted into the night. This time witnesses identified Frank Stillwell and Pete Spence as the shooters, both known associates of the Clantons, both men who had threatened us repeatedly. And once again, Sheriff Bean did nothing. He suggested Morgan should have been more careful, that perhaps we had brought this upon ourselves by enforcing the law too vigorously. I put Morgan's body on the train to California, where our parents waited to bury their son. Virgil and his wife were on the same train, still recovering from his own wounds. I told them I would not be joining them. I had business to finish in Arizona. Virgil understood. He had worn a badge long enough to know that sometimes justice requires a terrible resolve. The night after Morgan was murdered, I did not sleep. I sat in a chair facing the door of our home, my shotgun across my lap, my revolver at my side. I remembered Morgan as a boy running across our family farm in Illinois. I remembered teaching him to shoot, to track, to stand his ground when challenged. I remembered his wedding day, the pride in his eyes when he pinned on a deputy's badge in Tombstone. The grief came in waves, crushing the breath from my lungs, making my hands shake, but behind the grief was something colder, something harder, a clarity of purpose I had never known before. Dawn found me still sitting in that chair. My wife brought me coffee, asked what I intended to do. I told her I was going to kill every man responsible for Morgan's death, every man who had participated in the ambush on Virgil. I would hunt them to the ends of the earth, if necessary. She did not try to dissuade me. She had seen Morgan's body, had helped me wash his blood from my clothes. I went to the office of the U.S. Marshal, requested a deputy commission to pursue the murderers. The paperwork was drafted, but the territorial politics intervened. The influence of the cowboy faction reached even into the federal offices. The commission was delayed, then denied entirely. I approached the mayor of Tombstone, the county prosecutor, the territorial governor. Each expressed sympathy. Each explained why their hands were tied. Each suggested I let the system work. I asked if the system had worked for Virgil, for Morgan. They had no answer. The cowboys grew bolder. They rode through town, firing their pistols in the air, shouting that the remaining Earps would soon join Morgan in the grave. Sheriff Bean watched these displays without comment, without action. 3 days after Morgan's murder, I learned that Frank Stillwell and Ike Clanton were in Tucson, possibly planning to ambush Virgil as he passed through on the train to California. I gathered a few trusted men: Doc Holliday, Sherman McMaster, Turkey Creek Jack Johnson, Texas Jack Vermillion, Warren Earp, men who valued loyalty, who understood what had to be done. We rode to Tucson ahead of the train. I told the men with me that we were no longer acting as law officers, that what we were about to do existed outside the boundaries of badges and courts, that anyone who was uncomfortable with this should leave now. No one left. We waited at the Tucson station as Virgil's train arrived. As expected, Frank Stillwell was there, watching for Virgil, planning to finish what he had started with Morgan. He saw us instead, ran for his life. We pursued. When we caught him, I looked into the eyes of one of my brother's killers. I saw recognition there, saw fear. I told him Morgan sent his regards. Then I sent Frank Stillwell to whatever judgment awaits murderers. That night I slept for the first time since Morgan died. The sleep of a man who had taken the first step on a long journey, a necessary journey, the kind that changes a man forever. I knew there was no going back. I had crossed a line. Stillwell's death would be investigated, charges would be filed. The law that I had served for so many years would now brand me an outlaw. The irony was not lost on me, but I felt no regret, only the certainty that I had many miles yet to travel, many debts yet to collect. We returned to Tombstone after Tucson. Word of Stillwell's death had preceded us. The town was unusually quiet as we rode in. People watched from windows and doorways, some with approval, others with fear. I no longer cared what anyone thought. I gathered my remaining allies at our home, explained that I intended to hunt down every man involved in the attacks on my brothers. This would not be a mission sanctioned by any authority. We would be acting as judge, jury, and executioners. Any man who rode with me needed to understand this, needed to be prepared for the consequences. Doc Holliday laughed, that terrible, consumptive laugh of his, said he had been waiting for me to come to my senses. The others nodded their agreement. These were men who had seen the failure of traditional justice in the Arizona Territory, who recognized that some evils can only be addressed directly. We made our preparations methodically. Each man carried a revolver, a rifle, a shotgun, extra ammunition, enough food and water for extended travel, money sewn into our clothes in case we needed to separate. We dressed for the trail, for the mountains, for the border country where the cowboys had their strongholds. I created a list of names: Ike and Finn Clanton, Pete Spence, John Ringo, Curly Bill Brocious, Indian Charlie, Florentino Cruz. Each had been identified by witnesses or informants as participants in the attacks on my brothers. Each would be found. Each would face the same justice Frank Stillwell had met in Tucson. We discussed tactics. The cowboys would be expecting us, would be watching the main roads and trails. We needed to move unpredictably, to strike without warning, to use their fear against them. Sherman McMaster had once ridden with the cowboys before choosing a different path. He knew their hideouts, their habits, the places they went when they needed to disappear. This knowledge would prove invaluable in the days ahead. On the morning of March 20th, 1882, we rode out of Tombstone. A warrant had been issued for my arrest in the Stillwell killing. Sheriff Bayan made a show of organizing a posse to pursue us. We were not concerned. Bayan was a man who avoided danger. He would follow far behind, make noise, warn his cowboy friends of our approach. We counted on this. Our first destination was Pete Spence's wood camp in the south, pass of the Dragoon Mountains. Informants had placed Florentino Cruz there. Cruz had been seen with Frank Stillwell the night Morgan was killed, had bragged about his role in the murder. As we rode, I considered what we were undertaking. This was not law enforcement. This was vengeance, blood for blood, the oldest form of justice known to man. I had spent my adult life upholding the law, believing in its power to civilize the frontier. Now I was deliberately stepping outside its boundaries. The weight of this decision sat heavy on my shoulders, but not as heavy as the memory of Morgan dying in my arms. Doc rode beside me, asked what I was thinking. I told him I was thinking about the difference between justice and revenge. He considered this for a moment, then said, perhaps they were the same thing in a place where the law had been corrupted, where murderers walked free, while lawmen were gunned down in the streets. I had no answer to this, only the certainty that what we were doing was necessary. We made camp that night in a sheltered canyon, posted guards, spoke little, each man lost in his own thoughts. I cleaned my weapons, checked my ammunition, studied the crude map McMaster had drawn of Spence's camp, prepared myself for what morning would bring. I did not pray for guidance or forgiveness. Those bridges were already burned. I prayed only that my aim would be true, that no innocent would be harmed in what was to come, that when it was finished, I might find some measure of peace. Dawn found us alert, mounted, moving through the mountains like ghosts. The spring air was cool at that elevation. Birds called. In the chaparral, life continued its cycles, oblivious to the human dramas played out beneath the vast Arizona sky. We approached Spence's wood camp from above. The sun had just cleared the eastern mountains. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Men moved about beginning their day's work. From our vantage point, we could see Florentino Cruz emerged from a small cabin, began splitting wood with an axe. 4 other men were visible in the camp. None appeared to be Pete Spence. I signaled for the others to spread out, to cover all possible escape routes. Then I rode directly into the camp, my shotgun across my saddle. My face known to every man there. Cruz saw me first, dropped his axe, reached for the pistol at his waist. I was faster. The shotgun roared. Cruz fell. The other men froze. I called out for Pete Spence, was told he had gone to Benson to surrender himself on the Morgan Earp murder charge. A calculated move to place himself in protective custody, beyond my reach. I dismounted, approached Cruz, who still lived despite his wounds. I asked him about Morgan, about the night of the murder. Pain and fear loosened his tongue. He confirmed what we already suspected, named the men involved, admitted his own role. When he finished speaking, I ended his suffering with a single shot. Justice had been served. We left the wood camp as quickly as we had arrived, rode hard for the Babakamari Ranch, where informants told us Curly Bill Brocius and other cowboys were gathered. Brocius was a known leader of the outlaw faction, a man implicated in numerous robberies and killings, a man who had threatened the Earps repeatedly. We reached Iron Springs near the ranch in the late afternoon. I rode ahead with McMaster to scout. As we approached a water hole, we encountered Curly Bill and 8 of his men unexpectedly. They had been camping, were caught off guard by our appearance. Curly Bill raised a shotgun, fired. The blast struck my saddle horn, nearly unseated. Me. I drew my own shotgun, fired both barrels directly into Brocius's chest. He fell backward into the water hole, dead before he hit the ground. The other cowboys opened fire. Bullets tore through my coat, struck my boot. My horse was hit, reared. I maintained my seat through sheer determination, returned fire with my revolver as I retreated. McMaster covered me, then we were racing back to join the others. The cowboys pursued briefly, then broke off. Later we learned they had recovered Curly Bill's body, taken it away for burial. Another name crossed off my list, another debt paid. For the next 2 weeks, we crisscrossed the Arizona territory. Moving constantly, appearing where we were least expected. The remaining cowboys fled before us. Some left the territory entirely. Others barricaded themselves in friendly ranches or towns, always surrounded by witnesses, always careful to be seen in public places. Ike Clanton proved particularly elusive. After Stillwell's death and Cruz's confession implicated him directly in Morgan's murder, he rarely stayed in one place for more than a night. He abandoned his ranch, his friends, trusting no one. Johnny Ringo was found dead near Turkey Creek. Some said suicide. Others whispered that Doc Holliday had found him first, had settled an old score. Doc never confirmed nor denied these rumors, simply smiled, that ghastly smile of his when asked. By mid-April, the situation had changed dramatically. The power of the cowboy faction was broken. Those not dead had fled. The citizens of Tombstone and surrounding settlements moved about without fear for the first time in years. But warrants still existed for our arrests. The territorial government, under pressure from powerful ranching interests, could not publicly condone our actions, could not acknowledge that we had accomplished what the official law had failed to do. I met with representatives of the Wells Fargo Company, the mining interests, the merchants of Tombstone. All had suffered from the depredations of the cowboys. All had benefited from our vendetta. They provided funds, letters of introduction, assurances that certain charges would be delayed indefinitely if we left the territory. On April 15, 1882, we rode north out of Arizona. Doc Holliday traveled to Colorado, the others scattered to New Mexico, Wyoming, Texas. I continued to California, rejoined Virgil, who was still recovering from his wounds. Told him what had been done. He listened in silence, then nodded once. The matter was closed between us. In 1887, Ike Clanton was finally killed by Detective Jonas V. Brighton while rustling cattle in Apache County, Arizona. The last name on my list had been crossed off, not by my hand, but crossed off nonetheless. The years passed. I drifted through Colorado, Idaho, California, Alaska. The frontier changed around me. Railroads and telegraph lines connected once isolated. Settlements. Statehood came to the territories. The wild spaces were tamed, fenced, claimed. I operated saloons, refereed boxing matches, prospected for gold, always moving, always watching over my shoulder. The warrants from Arizona were never formally withdrawn. Though no serious attempt was ever made to serve them, I rarely spoke of Tombstone, of the vendetta ride. When asked, I gave the official version: self-defense at the OK Corral, pursuit of wanted fugitives afterward, the necessary actions of lawmen in a lawless time. Few believed this sanitized account, but they accepted it, allowed me the dignity of my silence. The true story lived only in my memories, in my nightmares. Morgan dying in my arms, the thunder of the shotgun as Curly Bill fell, the faces of men in their final moments, the knowledge of what I had become in those bloody weeks of 1882. Was it justice? Was it revenge? The line between the two blurred with the passing decades. What remained clear was the necessity, in that time, in that place, when the institutions of law had been corrupted, when murderers walked free, when my family was being systematically destroyed, there had been no other path available to me. I have been called hero and villain, lawman and murderer. Perhaps I was all of these things, perhaps none of them. I was simply a man who would not allow his brother's blood to cry out from the ground, unanswered. If there is judgment in the world beyond this one, I will face it without regret, without excuse. I did what was necessary, what any man of honor would have done, what the code of the frontier demanded. The Arizona Territory eventually found peace. Civilization took root. The sort of civilization my brothers and I had fought for, had bled for. Perhaps that is legacy enough for the Earp brothers, for the terrible vengeance we unleashed upon those who had wronged us. I am an old man now, the last of my generation, the last who remembers the truth of those days. When I am gone, the legend will remain, growing with each telling, less human, more myth. But you have heard the truth from me. Make of it what you will. They killed my brothers. I killed them in return. That is the simplest truth. The rest is just details.